Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to have some follow-up discussion from the Response and Resurgence video that I did a few weeks back. This video was interesting in that it got about the same amount of views as any other video that I do, but it had 4 or 5 times the amount of comments at over 200. This tells me that people had a lot of strong feelings about the subject one way or another, and that's great. And so, after answering as many of the comments as I could, and having a lot of discussion, there were a lot of points that I didn't cover in the first video. I really learned a lot by having to defend my own arguments, but also learned a lot from people in support of my arguments as well. So if you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend you do so, since, this is essentially part 2 of that video, and the link will be in the description below. In the interest of time, I won't be reading every single sentence from every comment, but trying to focus on a few specific points that I think further the conversation. Also, Tomer from MTG Goldfish wrote me a lengthy response on Twitter and Reddit, and even though he disagreed with some of my arguments, I think it would be really cool if I could engage him in a recorded debate, so hopefully we can make that work. And so with that, let's get into the comments. Alright, so this one I particularly enjoyed.
This is not rocket science, WTF. Which color has the best card draw? Not Boros. Which color has the best ramp? Not Boros. Which colors have the best tutors? Not Boros. Which color has the best removal? Not Boros. What does Boros have? Land destruction, board wipes, hate bears, exile, and burn spells. And that's nice, but is it good enough compared to black tutors and card draw, blue counter spells and cantrips, and green land ramp and mana dorks? No, it's not. Case closed.
Oh boy. So this comment is actually a perfect example of something that I noticed while fielding a lot of comments for the first video, is that people get so caught up on the weakness of Boros that they forget about what the strengths are. So let's just go through this one by one. Best card draw, agree with you on that one, definitely not Boros. You really have to jump through a lot of hoops to figure out how you're going to draw cards in Boros. I hope that they fix that problem soon. Best ramp. So someone else pointed this out. Boros ramp is not any worse than Grixis, Esper, Izzet, Dimir, or most things that don't have green in them. And Boros can actually take advantage of things like Dowsing Dagger and Sword of the Animist, which actually give it a leg up, because in all those color pairings I just mentioned, chances are you're probably not going to have a lot of early game threats, because those colors tend to be more combo based. So in a way, Boros actually has better ramp than a lot of the other multicolored non-green color pairings. Tutors. Boros tutors for one thing really well, but that's equipments. And there are a lot of good equipments. Tutoring for Sunforger, Sunforger finds the thing you need it most when you need it, which it's a little roundabout, but that's still tutoring for something that you really need. So yes, while they don't have Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor, they can still tutor for equipments, and especially if you're tutoring for Sunforger, that's going to tutor you into more stuff. And so that's exactly the point right there, is that Boros actually has really good tutors for equipments, just not tutors for everything. So this person is losing sight of what the colors can actually do by getting so focused on what they can't do. We'll see that again right here in the next point. Which color has the best removal? Not Boros. Strongly disagree. White has clearly the best removal in the game. White has at least 3 board wipes that say exile all creatures. You have Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Chaos Warp, any of the Oblivion Ring type effects, Return to Dust, Crush Contraband, Wear Tear, a bunch of burn spells, Blasphemous Act, Hour of Revelation. Should I go on? For all the things Boros may not have, it certainly has the best removal. And then they go into what they think Boros actually has: land destruction, board wipes, hate bears, exile, and burn spells. Hate to break it to you, those things are really good. Land destruction is so good that it's generally frowned upon because no one else gets to play the game. I'm not saying you should use it in every single meta that you play in, but there's a time and a place for it. And if you play with someone who's got a green deck that just likes to go out of control ramping, fully on board for an Armageddon. Board wipes. Just talked about a lot of them. Boros has some of the best ones, mostly white, but Blasphemous Act is also an insane card because sometimes you cast it for 1, which means you can still follow it up with 2 or 3 additional plays on the rest of your turn. That's really, really good. Hate bears. If you start laying down hate bears and stacks effects, you will see some pretty good players make a whole lot of mistakes because they're not used to things like Torpor Orb and the Torpor Orb creatures. They're not used to things like Aven Mind Sensor. They're not used to things like Grand Abolisher. Last night, for example, I got blown out by an Angelic Arbiter. Angelic Arbiter is a really good card that no one runs. It completely hoses your opponents. If they have any plans of attacking at all, they probably can't do the things they need to do to win the game, one of the biggest ones being anyone that's planning to use a Crater Hoof Behemoth. Continuing on, Exile. Yep, Exile is really, really good in Commander, especially when people start laying down Eldrazi and indestructible things. And burn spells are a little bit underplayed, but I've killed many a player with Earthquake, and before they changed the Planeswalker ruling, used to also take down many Planeswalkers with Boros Charm, Earthquake, and similar burn spell type of effects. So I don't think that case is nearly as closed as you make it out to be, because you've completely lost sight of what the colors can do, as opposed to what they can't do.
I knew that data would make you feel some type of way. Lol.
Yeah, so the Command Zone's comments had me very frustrated, very annoyed. My one kind of takeaway from the whole thing is the data says what it says, that's fine, and we can disagree about certain points of the data one way or another. But if they literally just don't make the comment, don't play Boros, it's the worst, I don't know that I actually get fired up enough to make the first video. So yeah, the whole thing just left me really frustrated. And of course, there were a number of people fully in support of my arguments. I appreciate that, I appreciate you, and I hope you can appreciate me for sticking up for a color pair that you enjoy. One interesting comment from here, Plaguefather Plays says,
Like all your videos, very well put together and fun to watch. Please keep up the awesome content.
the one thing that I wish I did in the first video, I wish I took just a little bit more time to really solidify all the points I was trying to make. I left a few things just a little bit more open-ended than I would have liked to, and a few people tried to stretch my arguments into places that I didn't really want them to be stretched into. So I wish I made some of them just a little bit more airtight, and we'll get into which ones those are in a little bit. And so we have a bunch more comments of people in support of Boros. One person saying,
Brah, my Adriana Captain of the Guard aggro deck is stupid. I have people in my playgroup that ask me not to play it because of how fast I kill the table.
I'd be interested to take a look at that deck list. I haven't really seen a lot of Adriana of the Guard, but I haven't seen very many good ones over the years. I really haven't seen much of it at all, quite honestly. It is a little bit hard to use, but pumping up your creatures is still really, really powerful, so if you can make everything work, it can be really strong. And I've actually started messing around with Adriana in my Aurelia deck, so we'll see how that goes. Another person says,
I've been piloting Aurelia since she came out in Gatecrash, as well as Archangel Avacyn, and I've never struggled or had a hard time finding success with either deck. I also definitely run a lot of the mentioned cards here like Mask of Memories in both decks. The decks are absolutely viable and a ton of fun. I really hope not too many people get discouraged away from them because of the data of that video.
and that's the thing that I really, really worry about, is that because the Command Zone is so large and they have so many followers, that they can be putting a bad message into a lot of people's heads. And so that's the thing that I worry about, is just people getting discouraged and sending the wrong message to a large number of players. And Jonah Goodwin wanting me to upload more Aurelia videos. I try to space them out. I would love to play Aurelia all the time, but I'm pretty sure you guys would get sick of that. The Game Chair says,
I was honestly surprised that they didn't ask you for some data. The sheer amount of games you play would add a lot to the study.
so using my channel for data would actually further a lot of the problems that I mentioned in the first video. So especially for the first year of my channel, my videos were pretty biased, where I ended up winning most of the games that I posted. Because honestly, it just feels better to spend all the time editing on a win rather than a loss. It took me some time to realize that there is a lot of value in uploading losses as well, but that was not something that I did right off the bat. So data from my channel would be very skewed and not be very helpful toward the study. And also, one of the big things too is that I don't have access to opponents' deck lists. That was one of the criteria for this study, is that you need to have the deck list of all 4 players at the table, and up until very recently, I really haven't had that. Now that some people are aware of the channel and some of them are fans, I am able to get opposing deck lists occasionally, but still not all the time. So yeah, it would have been cool to have been a part of the study, but I know that the data picked from my channel wouldn't be high quality data.
When I started playing Magic, I really struggled to find a playstyle that suited me. I quit for a while, but when Return to Ravnica Block came and I saw Boros, it was love at first sight. When I started thinking on getting into Commander, I really wanted to play with my favorite card, Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. When making my research to build my first Commander deck, I found the Command Zone a bit discouraging, but kept pressing forward. But every time I went to the store to play, I felt nervous for the color pair I brought to the table and often lost games. Since I've been watching your channel, you've been an awesome guide and encouragement, so now I can go to the store again with my Boros t-shirt and kick the butt of some control decks. Thank you very much for your content. P.S. I also want you to show the Command Zone firsthand what a Boros deck can do.
And so this is the type of comment that worries me most. This is the Command Zone's messaging discouraging someone from playing the colors that they want to play. And that's what I really take exception to, is that someone is discouraged from playing the deck that they want to play. And so even when Tomer responded to all my points, this was the one point that we both really agreed on, that the Command Zone really needs to be a lot more careful in their messaging, because they can discourage players, and that's not good.
Yeah, out of my 10 current decks I've got built, Jorkadine the Prevailer Vehicles deck was a little rough to get the balance right of every vehicle, token production for piloting everything, and removal for all the other stuff. But once I got it hammered out, oh man, have fun getting through all that mess of stupid. Lol.
And so yeah, this is one of the points that I was trying to hit on in the main video, is the week 1 problem of many of the content creators like Commander Clash and the Command Zone, where they're playing this deck literally one time and then never playing it again. Something like Jorkadine Vehicles is just gonna take a while to figure out. You're gonna have to lose a bunch of games with that deck first before you figure out how to win games with it. And there were a number of other similar comments like this as well. With DePaula Vehicles, the same. Firesong and Sunspeaker also fits into this category. You're gonna need to lose a few games before you can really figure out how to win with those decks.
Sunforger should be in any Boros deck or any deck with red-white in it.
Strongly agree. So Tomer disagreed with me on this point, and here's my response to that. If your games are regularly going at least 8 turns, you should have 8 mana. You should be making all your land drops, and you should also be accelerating with ramp. If you don't have 8 mana on turn 8, it's either a sign that you haven't built your deck properly, or you just got unlucky and didn't draw any of the things you actually needed. That happens sometimes too. But the majority of the time, you should be able to generate 8 mana, and once you do, Sunforger literally says, get the thing you need when you need it most.
Their data is very surface level to make any grand statements on 4-player EDH. While I do agree that land count and draw tutor capacity are the strongest things to win the game, and that Boros has a weaker capacity for those things, I also agree with you in regards to doubling damage and combat stats is extremely powerful, and the most frequent win condition according to Command Zone is combat damage. Although I think you're biased in favor of Boros, the strongest point you make is about skill and investment in the deck. Their stats at best only give a general view of the color pairings on an individual level. If you love Boros, practice a bunch, and spend the time to tune and update your deck list with the right tutors and commanders, you can definitely create a strong deck list, as this channel overwhelmingly shows.
So I like the way you've laid this out. You acknowledge that Boros is weaker at some things, which we just talked about, but also acknowledge that it's very good at doing combat damage. And as the Command Zone points out, 50% of player deaths occur to combat damage. And then they also go on to mention that practicing, spending time with the deck, refining it, can create a very strong deck list. And yes, I definitely agree with that sentiment. And again, that was one of my main points in the last video, is that we're running into this week 1 problem of, on a few of these channels, no one's bringing refined deck lists, they're literally just playing it for the first time.
Can work doesn't mean it's not the worst. Sure, you can make a white-red deck work in Commander, but that doesn't mean that the pairing of the 2 colors with the least ramp, card draw, and workable infinite engines isn't the worst, given that these are generally the way that Commander games where rushing to lethal is not as viable in 20 life formats are won. Playing Boros generally goes against everything you need in a 4-player game, as you'll be behind everyone else on resources, and hardly cuts it in 1 vs 1 either. Yes, you make very good points in highlighting that the best cards in Boros, which I feel like pointing this out even though I'm not here to defend anyone, the Command Zone already spoke of as being good in other videos, but that does not make the whole archetype stronger than any else by themselves. At best, they make good picks in a red-white X Commander decks. You advocating for taking only competitive commanders in consideration sinks the argument even more to the bottom, because if we are cherry-picking strong commanders in competitive decks, then Boros gets shafted even harder than they would in a casual setting, having to compete with Tassiger, Doomsday decks, Carador, Teferi, Rurik stacks, and what have you. While I agree that the methodology that the Command Zone used in their survey can be seen as questionable at best, and I agree you can absolutely make a decent red-white deck, nothing of this proves that Boros isn't still the worst color combination in Commander.
Alright, so lots to dive into here. We talked about the ramp a little bit. Boros ramp, not significantly different than many other colors that aren't green. Card draw, yes, it's terrible, we know. Workable infinite engines, this one's interesting. I actually built an Aurelia deck that has 13 different combo win conditions. There are actually a lot of combo win conditions in Boros, just that most people don't play them. And I think that the reason for that is that you don't have access to the black tutors, which can find literally any part of your combo. But also, if you like playing Boros, you're probably not necessarily a combo player. Like, the reason I play Boros is because I like to attack things a lot. But yes, at some point in the future, I'll get my combo Aurelia deck posted, and you guys can see just how many infinite combos actually exist in Boros. And I don't even think I included all of them, I'm sure I missed a couple. So in the next section, they talk about resource generation in Boros. With things like Sword of the Animist and Mask of Memory, you can generate more resources than a lot of players, especially in Aurelia, where you're talking about getting 2 combats. If those stick around for a turn or 2 and an attack with Aurelia, I have more lands than at least 2 of the players at the table, sometimes more than all 3, and oftentimes I'll have more cards in hand than the other 3 players at the table. Just because it's harder to generate resources doesn't absolve you from having to do so. You just need to find the ways to do it, and as I've talked about a bunch, I use a whole lot of equipment tutors to find the equipments I need to be able to do that consistently. And then they go on to talk about the competitive commanders bit. This is where people tried to stretch my argument into a place that I didn't want it to go. At no point was I saying that we should only take competitive commanders. What I was simply saying is that the 2 best Boros commanders show up literally 1 time in the 27 Boros decks in this study. I'm not saying competitive Magic, I'm just saying the commanders that have abilities stronger than all of the other ones show up literally 1 time. By comparison, I went and checked out the Sultai stats. Tassiger, Sidisi, and Damia show up a lot, which are the really good commanders in those colors. There was something like 1 Boros deck and 1 partner Sultai deck. So all I'm simply saying is that I just wanted to see a couple more of the high-end Boros commanders in this study. And if you take the frequency of the best Boros commanders, let's say Aurelia, Gisela, Iroas, and Akiri Bruce, and bring them up to the same percentage of games played as the Sultai commanders, the win rate is going to go up. So I was in no way advocating for competitive-only commanders, just that I found it really odd that the best Boros commanders showed up in very small frequency in the study.
Bro, I love the channel and I appreciate the debate offered here. However, in my opinion, arguing that Boros is in any way, shape, or form competes with any of the other 2 color combos is kinda ridiculous currently. Every other color combination is stronger by a pretty wide margin. If we're talking strongest commanders, let's see a well-built Boros deck versus a well-built Edric, Zur, Momir Vig, Tazri, Derevi, etc. Boros can't even hold a candle to mono green, or black, or blue if it's a combo deck, or Godo if it's all in combo. One of its major issues is that people generally make land hate taboo, and that is easily one of Boros' most powerful avenues of attack. I love the color combo, and I sincerely hope they print more support, but right now it just lacks the support to really throw punches with brokenness. Just my 2 cents, no salt intended, love the content, and keep making Boros great again. Another thing to note is that unless you're very competitive, Commander is a casual format, and you should also play what you want to play. Usually the thing you like to play performs the best, since you have the most fun repeatedly playing the same deck again and again.
Alright, so great comments here. First off, to Kicking Wang, that's a funny screen name, by the way. I'd like to say thank you for disagreeing with my arguments in a polite way. One of the previous comments we saw, you could tell that someone was just seeing red when they wrote the comment. You can disagree with me. All I care is that you do it respectfully, and that's what they've done here. So anyway, let's dig into their comment. So you're starting to get into the competitive mindset again. Again, at no point was I ever talking about competitive Commander in the last video. So one caveat, of all the shows that they pulled data from, I haven't really watched a lot of Commander Verse. I've seen a lot of Mudsta stuff, I've seen a lot of Commander Clash, I've seen a lot of Game Nights, so I have a pretty good feel on the type of decks that they play in those channels. Mudsta is the only one I'm aware of where they really play high power decks, but even then I wouldn't call it competitive Commander. Not uncommon for some of his videos to end around like turn 8 or so. So when you're talking about things like Edric, Zur, Momir Vig, Tazri, Derevi, etc., those are your more competitive commanders. I faced all those decks, and yes, they are very, very strong. And I'm certainly not saying that running into those decks repeatedly, I'm going to expect to have a lot of success, at least with the tools that Boros currently has. But yeah, main point, in no way was I talking about competitive Commander. I'm talking about your average games of Commander, where the game's going to go probably 8 to 10 turns, maybe 11 or 12 if there's some board wipes, cyclonic rifts, things like that. Because in that space, I don't think Boros is significantly better or worse than most of the other color pairings. Land destruction is an interesting one, and it's something that I might start to explore a bit more since I've been facing some pretty powerful decks in my local meta. I'll keep you guys posted on how the results go with that. And the second commenter goes on to mention that Commander is typically a casual format, and that's what I agree with.
Honestly, I agree with you, but I also agree with them, if that makes sense. Boros is the hardest to build, but you can build a really strong one. Though it is really hard to do the same in a budget, you really need the mana rocks and equipments, and the good ones are too expensive. So if I would say to someone who is looking for a budget deck, I would tell them to avoid Boros, but in the end it's really important to play what you like.
So strongly agree with that. Always play what you like. I also do agree with the fact that it's not easy to build a good budget Boros deck. This came up with Tomer a little bit in his response and in a few other comments as well. Because the best Boros cards are significantly better than the others, you are kind of forced into playing them and you don't have a lot of options necessarily. A good example of that is Stoneforge Mystic. Stoneforge Mystic is just incredible. And I don't know, what are they, like $30 right now? So if you want a good Boros deck, you should probably include Stoneforge Mystic. So yeah, I agree with your points. It can be hard to build. You can build a strong one. It is really tough to do it on a budget. And you should always play the deck that you want to play. And one more point is that I think something like a little bit of card draw, like literally a white harmonize and a red harmonize, I think would open up so many more avenues for Boros where you don't need to jump through all the hoops that you do currently. I think that would allow a lot more freedom in deck building. So that's something that I would like to see.
Is Boros the worst pairing? Yes. Should you never play Boros because of that? No. If you play Boros, will you be doomed to never win? No.
So I personally don't think Boros is the worst pairing. I understand that many other people do, but we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. But I do agree with your sentiment of always play the deck you want to play. This is another comment that I really like. This one resonated with me pretty deeply. Magical Hacker says,
why is it that people always think of colorless decks as having more ramp and card draw than mono white decks, mono red, and even Boros decks? Could it be because of the fact that mono white's best options for drawing cards and ramping mana are colorless cards? Since they aren't colored white, people just run less of those two categories when the deck doesn't have a color that is more widely known for having playable cards in those colors. I'd be interested to see statistics looking at win percentage of color combinations when balanced for card draw discrepancies.
This is a fantastic point. As I mentioned, Boros Ramp, not any worse than most of the other color pairs that don't involve greed. And in fact, and better in a lot of ways, with things like Dowsing Dagger and Sword of the Animist, both things that you can tutor for in white. So yeah, if you're building decks in these colors, you're gonna need to be running a lot of artifacts. It does open you up to Vandalblast type of effects, which isn't the best. But I think people fall into this one big problem of they don't see any easy card draw options in those colors, so they just don't play it. Just because your colors don't have a great way to generate card advantage, doesn't mean that you just don't run any ways to generate advantage. I don't care what colors you're playing, if you put like 0 card draw in a deck, you're probably going to struggle quite a bit. So even though it's harder in Boros, and you have to rely on a lot of artifacts, you still need to be able to generate value, resources, and advantage, just the same as the other colors would, just that you have to jump through more hoops to do it, and rely heavily on your artifacts. But yes, just because there aren't good white cards that say draw cards, doesn't mean that it's okay to not draw cards while playing white. You just need to find other ways to do it. To the last part of the comment talking about win percentages balanced for card draw discrepancies, I would love to see that study. I have no idea how you go about putting that data together, but it would be really, really cool to see.
I feel like we're missing a commander that pushes the punishment side of Boros. A commander that really wants to use cards like Alms Collector, Harsh Mentor, Grand Abolisher, but the closest thing we've got currently has been Bassandra, and she's terrible. To me, it seems the best way to shore up Boros' weaknesses in a way that fits the color pie would be forcing your opponents to play by your rules. I've also never understood why Boros doesn't get creature-based card draw in almost the same way as green. Also, playing Boros and not having Sunforger in the 99 is like playing EDH without Soul Ring.
Strongly agree with that last point. But yeah, I really agree with that. I think many people will change their tune if we get a good 2 or 3 mana Boros commander that is a hate bear. If you give me Grand Abolisher or Aven Mind Sensor on a legendary red-white creature, I think Boros is going to get a lot more respect, especially from the higher powered decks. And yes, I would also like to see more creature-based card draw, especially in white, because white's all about like generating soldiers and things like that. I think that they really need to print a card like that sooner or later. But yes, give us one good Boros Stacks commander, and I think a lot of people are going to change their tune. Next, we get into a lot of people talking about the methodology that the command zone used. I won't read through all of these, but I'll hit on a couple quick points. The first one says,
They got their numbers wrong somewhere. It's literally impossible to get a negative %.
I'm not a math expert, I'm going to have to take your word for it on that one. But yes, I do agree with the overall sentiment that the quality of the data, especially when it came to the color section, is really poor because it was such a small sample size. This comment's rather long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to pick from a couple points in there. They talk about some of the specific meta stuff from each of the shows, and how some of the absurd and funny themes are going to create an atypical commander environment, so I agree with that. They go on to make a great point to say,
Good scientists are careful not to extrapolate their results beyond what they can definitely prove, and this is where the command zone makes their biggest mistake. By making sweeping judgment statements based on small and no representative sample size, they are extrapolating their results across all of everything, and the data can't stand up to the weight of that.
And they end it with,
Truly groundbreaking work that took a lot of courage to be the first to attempt, but now it's time to figure out how to generate some big data.
So I agree with this as well. I really applaud the command zone for just trying to go through this exercise of gathering all this data. Now, the way that you would improve upon this study would be to find a way to be able to generate all this data from a larger pool size and relying on less YouTube channels where, like I've said a few times, people play to the camera a little bit, but instead actually pulling data from like many local shops is what I think would actually give you some really, really good data. I have no idea how you go about doing that. It sounds like a ton of work and probably costs a ton of money, but it would be really, really cool if someone could figure that out. And then we had a few more comments talking about the sample size being too small, their methodology being flawed in various ways. And I agree with that. Like I just said, great first attempt at trying to gather all this data, but especially when you start getting down into like the color specific stuff, where you're talking about 20 or 30 decks, that's a really small sample size, and it's hard to gather good data on that.
I've been waiting so long for a crossover event. Please make an appearance on game nights.
That would be really, really awesome. I don't know if this video series is helping or hurting my cause, but it would be really, really cool to be on the show. I'm sure it would be a ton of fun. I will have to temper myself a little bit. I won't be able to just show up and be like, I've got this Boros deck and I'm going to beat the crap out of all of you, because if I do that, then I'll probably just get ganged up on and then look real silly on camera. So I'm going to have to figure out how to be very political in showing off the way that Boros deserves to be showed and not getting ganged up on by the table. And then finally, Neil had a bunch of nice things to say. Thank you, Neil. But the main takeaways here are, if you build Boros the right way, it can be very strong. And with that, that's going to bring us to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this viewer-submitted comments video, and let me know if you'd be interested in seeing me debate some of these points with Tomer from MTG Goldfish. Anyways, as always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.